The smell of wet earth still wakes me up at night. Not the clean smell of rain on a garden. No, this is different. This is the smell of Vietnamese clay mixed with rotten bamboo, with mold, with something else I could never quite identify until years later, when I realized it was death itself seeping into the soil. That smell lives in my nose. 53 years, and I can still taste it in the back of my throat when I close my eyes. People ask me what it was like being a tunnel rat. They've seen the documentaries, read the books, watched those movies where some actor crawls through a plywood tunnel with good lighting and maybe a fake spider. They think they understand, but understanding and knowing are two different things entirely. You can understand that fire is hot. Knowing means you've been burned. I was burned. We all were. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that in 1968, I was 20 years old, 5 feet 6 inches tall, weighed about 140 pounds soaking wet, and those measurements made me perfect for the deadliest job in the entire Vietnam War. Small enough to fit through holes that would make a dog hesitate. Light enough that maybe, just maybe, the bamboo floors over the punji pits wouldn't collapse under my weight. Young enough to be stupid, scared enough to stay alive. They called us tunnel rats because that's exactly what we were. Rats, vermin crawling through the darkness looking for other vermin. The Viet Cong had spent 20 years building a network of tunnels under the jungles of Cu Chi that stretched for over 200 kilometers. 200 kilometers of hell carved into the red clay of Vietnam. And someone had to go down there and clear them out. That someone was me. I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, Steel Town. My father worked the mills, came home every night smelling like iron and sweat, hands so rough they could sand wood. My mother kept a clean house and made sure we said grace before every meal. I had 2 sisters, both younger, both smarter than me. We weren't rich, but we weren't poor either. Just regular people living regular lives in a regular American town that might as well have been on another planet from where I ended up. I got drafted in the summer of '67. The letter came on a Tuesday. I remember that because my mother was making her meatloaf that she only made on Tuesdays. I walked in from my job at the hardware store, saw the envelope on the kitchen table, and I knew. Everyone knew what those envelopes meant. My mother didn't cry, not in front of me anyway, but she burned the meatloaf that night. First time in my life she ever burned a meal. Boot camp was at Fort Benning, Georgia. The heat there was something else. I thought I was going to die just from the humidity alone. Little did I know that Georgia was just a warm-up for what was coming. The drill sergeant screamed at us until their voices went hoarse, made us run until we vomited, taught us how to shoot and march and follow orders without thinking. They tried to break us down and build us back up as soldiers. What they didn't teach us, what nobody could teach us, was how to be afraid in the right way. Because there's different kinds of fear. There's the fear you feel when a car almost hits you. That quick spike of adrenaline that fades as soon as danger passes. And then there's the other kind. The kind that moves into your bones and never leaves. The kind that becomes part of who you are. That second kind, you can only learn that in the tunnels. I arrived in Vietnam in January of '68, right before the Tet offensive, though we didn't know that was coming. Nobody told us the whole country was about to explode. We landed at Tan Son Nut Air Base, and the moment they opened the door of that plane, the heat hit me like a physical wall. It was like stepping into a wet oven. The air was so thick with moisture and strange smells that I couldn't breathe right for the first few minutes. Jet fuel, cooking fires, vegetation rotting in the heat, and underneath it all something sweet and sickening that I would later learn was the smell of rice paddies fertilized with human waste. Welcome to Vietnam. They processed us through like cattle, gave us our jungle fatigues that were already damp from the humidity, assigned us to units. I was sent to the 25th Infantry Division, stationed at Cu Chi Base Camp. Cu Chi. Even the name sounds like something dark, doesn't it? Little did I know that the entire base was built right on top of one of the most extensive tunnel networks in the country. We were sleeping over the enemy's heads. They were literally beneath our feet, listening to us, watching us through hidden air holes, waiting. I wasn't a tunnel rat at first. Nobody starts out as a tunnel rat. I was just a regular infantry grunt, humping through the jungle on search and destroy missions, jumping at every sound, sweating through my uniform every single day. The jungle there was so thick in places that you couldn't see 10 feet in front of you. Every step could be your last. The Viet Cong had booby traps everywhere. Punji pits covered with leaves, tripwires connected to grenades, mines that would take your legs off before you even heard the click. But the tunnels. The tunnels were something else entirely. I remember the first time I saw one. We were on patrol maybe 6 weeks after I arrived. A guy named Morrison, big corn-fed kid from Nebraska, stepped on what looked like solid ground and just disappeared. 1 second he was there. The next second there was just a hole in the sound of him screaming. We pulled him out, and he was covered in these long cuts from the sharpened bamboo stakes they'd planted at the bottom. Punji sticks, they call them. Sometimes they dip them in poison or human feces to make sure the wounds got infected. Morrison lost his leg eventually, but he lived. A lot of guys weren't that lucky. After we got Morrison evacuated, our lieutenant told us to secure the area. That's when we found it. A small hole, maybe 2 feet wide, hidden under a termite mound. Just a black opening leading straight down into the earth. We all stood around staring at it like it was a portal to hell. Which, in a way, I guess it was. The lieutenant asked for volunteers to go down and check it out. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. We just stood there in that awful, humid silence, listening to the jungle buzz and click around us. All of us thinking the same thing. Who would be crazy enough to crawl into that darkness? And then the lieutenant looked at me, looked at my size. I was the smallest guy in the platoon. Well, I thought, isn't that something? They didn't give me any special training, not that first time. They just handed me a flashlight and a .45 pistol and told me to see what was down there. Standard procedure, they said. Like there was anything standard about crawling into a hole in the ground in a country full of people who wanted to kill you. I remember my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the flashlight. The entrance was slick with moisture, the clay walls pressing in on me from every side as I lowered myself down. The heat in that tunnel was even worse than above ground, if you can believe that. There was no air movement at all, just this thick, dead stillness that wrapped around you like a blanket. I could taste the earth on my tongue, feel it clogging my nostrils. That first tunnel was maybe 30 feet long and empty, just an abandoned spider hole, probably used as a temporary shelter during our patrols. I came back up gasping for air, covered in red clay, and the lieutenant nodded at me like I'd just done something special. But all I could think about was how close those walls had been, how dark it was, how alone. That should have been the end of it. One and done, that's what I told myself. Let someone else crawl into the next one. But word got around. There's a small guy in the 25th who went into a tunnel and came back out alive. Before I knew it, I was being requested for tunnel clearing operations. They pulled me off regular patrol and assigned me to a specialized unit. There were maybe 15 of us at any given time. All small guys, all volunteered or voluntold for the job. We were the tunnel rats. We had a saying, non gradum anus rodentum. It's Latin, or at least what we thought was Latin. It means not worth a rat's ass. That was us. Not worth a rat's ass. We wore that phrase like a badge of honor, because if we didn't laugh about it, we'd have to think about what we were really doing. And thinking too much would get you killed faster than any Viet Cong soldier. Let me tell you about the equipment, because the equipment was a joke. We carried a flashlight, usually one of those Army-issue angle head lights that were heavy and unreliable and would flicker out at the worst possible moment. A pistol, usually a .45 automatic, or sometimes a .38 revolver if you could get your hands on one. The revolver was better underground because it wouldn't jam, and in those tight spaces, a jam meant death. We carried a knife, sometimes a bayonet, and that was it. No radio because radios didn't work underground. No backup weapon because there wasn't room. No body armor because it would just slow you down and get you stuck in the narrow passages. Sometimes we'd bring down a gas mask, but the tunnels had so many turns and chambers that gas rarely worked. The VC would just retreat deeper, wait it out, then come back. They knew those tunnels like you know your own house. They'd lived in them for years. Every hidden chamber, every secret passage, every trap, they had it all memorized. We were just blundering around in the dark, hoping we'd make it back out. The pistol? God, let me tell you about the pistol. The .45 was loud, really loud. Above ground, you don't think about it that much. There's other sounds, the jungle, helicopters, artillery in the distance. But underground, in those tight clay tunnels, a gunshot was like having a bomb go off next to your head. The first time I fired my weapon in a tunnel, I thought my eardrums had burst. I couldn't hear anything for 3 days afterward, except this high-pitched ringing that made me want to claw my own ears off. After that, I tried to avoid shooting if I could. The knife was quieter. That's a hell of a thing to have to learn about yourself, that you'd rather use a knife than deal with the noise. The VC, they knew about the noise too. Sometimes they'd set up ambushes specifically designed to make you fire your weapon. They'd have a guy waiting in a side chamber, and when you shot at him, his buddy behind you would be able to locate you by the muzzle flash and the sound. You'd be deaf and blind for just a few seconds. But a few seconds was all they needed. I'm getting ahead of myself. That happens a lot these days. The memories don't come in order anymore. They're all jumbled up, pieces of different days mixing together. until I can't always tell what happened when. The doctors say that's normal for trauma. Normal. As if any of this was normal. Let me tell you about the day I found the bodies. It was August of '68. We'd been working a tunnel complex near the village of Ku Chi for about a week. This was a big one, the intelligence guys said. Multiple levels, storage rooms, maybe even a hospital. The VC used these tunnels for everything: living quarters, weapons caches, meeting rooms, operating theaters where they'd do surgery by candlelight. There were even underground kitchens where they'd cook with special smokeless stoves so our aircraft couldn't spot them from above. My job was to map the tunnel. They'd send me down with a compass and a notepad wrapped in plastic, and I'd crawl through, noting the turns and the chambers and the distances. It was painstaking work. Every tunnel was different. Some were wide enough to crouch in, almost comfortable if you ignored the spiders and centipedes and scorpions that lived in the walls. Others were so tight you had to exhale completely, just to squeeze through, pushing yourself forward with your toes, your arms stretched out in front of you, the weight of the earth pressing down on your back. Claustrophobia was the first enemy. You had to make peace with the tightness, or it would eat you alive. I saw guys lose it down there, start screaming and thrashing, getting themselves stuck worse. Some of them we had to pull out with ropes. Some of them we couldn't pull out at all. There's at least 2 guys I know of who are still down there, somewhere in those tunnels. Their bodies absorbed back into the Vietnamese clay. Nobody talks about them. Nobody wants to think about it. I learned to control my breathing. Slow and shallow. In through the nose, out through the mouth. I'd focus on one thing at a time. The feel of the clay under my fingertips, the small circle of light from my flashlight, the next few feet in front of me. If I thought about how deep I was, how much earth was between me and the sky, I'd start to panic. So I didn't think about it. I just crawled. That day in August, I entered the tunnel around 0700 hours. The entrance was hidden under a cooking pot in an abandoned hut. Clever, really. You'd walk right past it without a second thought. But one of our Kit Carson scouts, a former VC who'd switched sides, he knew about it. He'd lived in these tunnels before he defected. He showed us where to look. The first section was standard, a vertical shaft about 3 feet in diameter going straight down for maybe 15 feet. I lowered myself in, my back against one wall, my feet against the other, spider walking my way down. At the bottom, the tunnel turned horizontal and I had to get on my belly. The walls here were smooth, polished by years of bodies crawling through. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see scratches in the clay where fingernails had dug in. Oh, I tried not to think about whether those scratches were from VC soldiers going about their daily business or from someone being dragged. I crawled for maybe 50 meters, passing 2 side chambers that were empty except for some rotten rice and a broken clay pot. The air was getting thicker the deeper I went. There were air shafts, I knew, hidden above ground and disguised as termite mounds or bamboo groves, but they didn't do much this far down. Every breath felt like I was sucking on wet cotton. Then I hit the first trap. It was a simple one, a trap door over a short drop with pungy stakes at the bottom. I felt the ground give slightly under my hand and froze. Just stopped dead. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. Moving very, very slowly, I probed the clay around me with my fingers until I found the edge of the trap door. Then I crawled around it, pressing myself against the wall so tight I could feel the individual grains of clay imprinting on my cheek. That was the thing about the traps. They weren't designed to kill you outright, not most of them. They were designed to wound you, to make you scream, to draw your buddies in to help you so they could be killed too, or to leave you stuck and bleeding in the dark where you'd slowly die of infection or blood loss or dehydration. A quick death was a mercy. The VC didn't deal in mercy. After the trapdoor, the tunnel widened slightly, and I found myself in a chamber, maybe 6 feet across. There were sleeping mats rolled against the wall, a small altar with a Buddha statue, some personal items. A family had lived here, I realized. A mother, a father, children. This had been someone's home. I marked it on my notepad and kept going. The tunnel sloped downward after that, taking me deeper into the earth. I lost track of time almost immediately. There's no way to tell time underground. No sun, no sounds from above, nothing to orient yourself. Just the endless crawl forward, the flashlight beam bobbing with every movement, the smell of clay and something else getting stronger. I knew what that smell was now. I'd smelled it before. On battlefields in villages after firefights. Sweet and rotten, and somehow metallic all at once. The smell of bodies that had been dead for a while. Every instinct told me to turn back. Every rational thought in my head was screaming to get out, to let someone else handle this, to just go back up into the sunlight and breathe clean air and never think about these tunnels again. But I didn't turn back. I couldn't. Because if I turned back, they'd just send me down again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next, until I found whatever was making that smell or until the tunnels killed me. The passage opened into another chamber, bigger this time. My flashlight flickered once, twice, and my heart nearly stopped before it stabilized. I swept the beam around the room, and at first I couldn't understand what I was seeing. It looked like piles of cloth, stacks of rags against the walls, and then my brain caught up with my eyes and I realized they weren't rags at all. They were bodies, dozens of them, maybe more, stacked against the walls like cordwood, some of them wrapped in cloth or woven mats, others just bare. They were in various stages of decay. Some were barely more than skeletons, the flesh long gone, the bones yellow-brown from the clay. Others were more recent, bloated and discolored, features still recognizable if you look close enough, which I didn't want to do, which I did anyway. I don't know how long I stayed in that chamber. It felt like hours. It might have been minutes. Time doesn't work right when you're surrounded by death on that scale. I remember my flashlight beam moving from face to face, or what was left of faces. I remember the smell getting so strong I gagged, though nothing came up because I hadn't eaten since the night before. I remember the absolute silence, the kind of silence that only exists underground, where even the insects and birds can't reach. I counted them. I don't know why. It just seemed like something I should do. Someone should count them. Someone should know how many there were. 203. I counted 203 bodies in that chamber, and in the 2 connected chambers I found behind it. Men, women, children. Soldiers in black pajamas and civilians in regular clothes. Some had been shot. Some had been stabbed. Some had no visible wounds at all, which made me think they'd been gassed or poisoned or maybe just starved. There was no way to know. There was no way to know any of it. I later learned that this tunnel complex had been hit by our bombers several months before. The bombs hadn't collapsed the tunnels. They were too deep for that, but they'd sealed off most of the exits. The people inside had been trapped. Some had probably suffocated when the air shafts got blocked. Others had probably killed each other fighting over the remaining food and water. And some had probably just given up and waited for death in the darkness. I don't blame them for fighting. I don't blame them for anything. What would you do, trapped underground with your family, watching your children slowly starve? What would any of us do? I marked the chambers on my map. I made my way back to the entrance. It took me 6 hours to clear that tunnel complex, 6 hours of crawling through the dark, past the traps and the empty chambers and the rooms full of the dead. When I finally pulled myself out of that entrance hole, back into the sunlight and the humid air, I couldn't speak. I just sat there on the ground, covered in clay and sweat and God knows what else, and I stared at nothing. My lieutenant asked me what I'd found. I handed him my map and my notes. He looked at them for a long time. Then he looked at me. "Are you okay, son?" he asked. I didn't answer. What could I say? That I'd just spent 6 hours crawling through a mass grave, that I'd counted bodies while my flashlight flickered and my lungs burned, and every second I expected a knife in the dark or a bullet in the back, that I would never, ever be okay again for as long as I lived. I just nodded. "I'm fine, sir," I said, "ready for the next one." That was the job. That was what tunnel rats did. We went into the dark and we came back out and we pretended we were fine. Because if we admitted we weren't fine, they'd send us to the rear and then someone else would have to take our place. Someone bigger, probably. Someone who'd get stuck in a narrow passage and die slow while the rest of us listened to them scream on the radio. Better us than them. That's what we told ourselves. Non gratum anus redentum. Not worth a rat's ass. I did 12 more tunnel missions after that day. Each one was its own kind of nightmare. In one, I came face to face with a VC soldier in a passage so tight we couldn't raise our weapons. We just stared at each other for a long moment, both of us breathing hard, both of us knowing that only one of us was going to make it out of that tunnel. He was young, maybe younger than me. He had this look in his eyes, not hate, not fear, just a kind of tired resignation, like he already knew how this was going to end. I got my knife out first. He didn't. I don't talk about that one much. I don't like to remember the sounds he made, the way his body felt against mine in that tight space, the way his blood soaked into my uniform and mixed with the clay. I don't like to remember that afterward I had to push past him to keep going, that I crawled over his body to continue my mission, that I finished mapping that tunnel like nothing had happened. You can't think about it. That's the only way to survive. You put it in a box in your mind and you lock that box and you throw away the key. You tell yourself you'll deal with it later. You never do. I made it home in early '69. I'd survived my tour, all 13 months of it, which was more than a lot of guys could say. The Army gave me a medal, and a plane ticket back to the States and a pamphlet on reintegrating into civilian life.